Lena, the cargo manifest needs your signature. I'll review it after we dock. The swaying began as a gentle rhythm, a lulling dance of wood and water that was easy to ignore. Lena Corsair kept her gaze fixed on the journal in her lap, documenting her misery in careful script, a small rebellion of ink and honesty in the opulent prison of the captain's cabin. She could feel his presence on the opposite side of the room without looking. Talon Blackwood, her husband, was a man who commanded space with the brutal efficiency of a winter storm. He wasn't theatrical or flamboyant. He was simply there, a silent monument of power in dark wool and leather, with steel-grey eyes that seemed to calculate the worth of everything and find it insufficient. The air around him always felt sharper, colder, carrying the scent of salt spray and the expensive tobacco he favored but never smoked. Then the rhythm changed. It wasn't gentle anymore. It was a violent, furious lurch that sent Lena's journal sliding across the polished desk. Her inkwell tipped, black liquid spreading like blood across mahogany. Her head snapped up. Across the cabin, Talon stood frozen at the window, his broad shoulders rigid, his knuckles white where they gripped the brass frame. His jaw was set in that hard, unforgiving line she knew too well. A sound started, low and ominous. A groan from the very bones of the ship. It was the sound of wood and rope under pressure they were never meant to endure. The steady creak of the rigging turned sharp, discordant. The gentle wash of waves against the hull became a roar. Then, silence. The wind died. The sudden absence of sound was more terrifying than any storm could be. The ship dropped. It wasn't a dip into a trough. It was a plunge into an abyss. One moment they were suspended on the rolling surface of the sea, the next the floor disappeared from beneath them. Lena's stomach launched into her throat, a hot, acidic wave of pure panic. A scream lodged in her chest, a physical thing with claws that couldn't escape. The world outside the window was no longer the grey expanse of ocean. It was a spinning, incomprehensible chaos of black water and white foam, tilting at an impossible angle. The cabin erupted into madness. A high-pitched alarm bell clanged from the deck above, a relentless, piercing shriek. Trunks and cases burst from their moorings, spilling silk dresses and leather-bound ledgers like the entrails of a dying beast. The sound of wood splintering, of the mast cracking like a gunshot, of men screaming orders that were swallowed by the wind, it was everywhere, a physical assault on her senses. It was the sound of the world tearing itself apart. Lena's hands flew to the arms of her chair, nails digging into velvet upholstery, searching for an anchor in a universe that had come unmoored. Her mind, usually a place of careful order and controlled resentment, became white-hot static, pure, animal terror. This wasn't like the stories her father used to tell of storms at sea. There was no time for prayers, no slow descent into fate, no moment for final words. There was only the violent, brutal, all-consuming fall. She chanced to look across the cabin. Talon's eyes met hers. For a single, suspended heartbeat, the mask was gone. The cold shipping magnate, the corporate tyrant, the man she had learned to hate with quiet, burning intensity, he had vanished. In his place was just a man, his eyes wide with the same stark, primal fear that was devouring her from the inside out. It was a moment of raw, terrible connection, a shared acknowledgement of the abyss that was about to swallow them whole. Then Talon moved. 3 steps across the tilting floor and his hand seized her wrist. "Hold on to me," he roared over the chaos. His grip was iron. The world exploded. The impact was a physical blow that drove the air from her lungs and rattled every bone in her body. There was a final, deafening roar of wood being shredded against rock, of canvas tearing, of the ocean claiming what had dared to ride upon it. Then, mercifully, everything went black. Hello friends. Before we journey deeper into Lena's story, I invite you to subscribe and share in the comments where you're listening from. Your presence here matters. Now, let's continue. Silence. The silence was the first thing she registered. A profound, ringing quiet that was more disorienting than the storm had been. Lena's head throbbed with deep, percussive pain. She blinked, her vision swimming in and out of focus. A thick, coppery taste filled her mouth, blood from where she'd bitten her tongue. Slowly, the scene resolved itself. Wet sand beneath her cheek. Splintered wood scattered like bones. Shredded canvas tangled in the wreckage. A section of the ship's railing driven into the beach at a grotesque angle, still dripping with seawater. The sharp, acrid smell of burning rope mixed with the damp, earthy scent of wet sand and crushed vegetation. She was alive. The realization didn't bring relief. It brought a fresh, suffocating wave of panic. Her lungs burned as she gasped for air, each breath a ragged, painful effort. Her hands trembled uncontrollably as she tried to push herself up. Everything hurt. Her ribs screamed in protest. Her dress, what remained of it, was torn, soaked, covered in sand and something darker. Blood. She needed to move. Now. She stumbled to her feet, the world tilting dangerously. The beach was littered with the ghosts of their voyage, a scattered trunk spilling fine china, an overturned barrel, a single leather boot half buried in sand. Bodies. She saw bodies. Sailors from the crew, motionless on the sand. She pushed past them, her legs shaking, her vision blurring with tears she refused to acknowledge. Behind the beach, the jungle rose like a wall, dense, towering, an indifferent fortress of green. It was alive, breathing around her, utterly and terrifyingly unknown. That's when she heard it. A low groan. Human. Lena's head snapped toward the sound, her heart hammering against her bruised ribs. 20 yards away, slumped against a piece of the ship's hull, was Talon Blackwood. Her husband. The man whose cold indifference had been the architecture of her unhappiness for 6 months. He was bleeding. The impeccable dark coat he always wore, his armor of authority, was torn at the shoulder, exposing a deep gash that wept steady streams of crimson. A cut above his eye traced blood down his temple, across his bearded jaw, dripping onto the dark sand beneath him. His shirt was shredded. His hands were scraped raw. But it wasn't the blood that shocked her. It was his expression. For the first time since their wedding day, Lena saw him stripped of power. The formidable fortress had crumbled. He wasn't issuing commands. He wasn't wearing that mask of icy control. He was just breathing, ragged, labored breaths, fighting to anchor himself back in the world. His eyes found hers. A current of raw recognition passed between them. It wasn't relief. It wasn't gratitude. It was the stark, shared knowledge of what they had just survived, and the terrifying understanding of what came next. Are you hurt? His voice was a rough rasp, but it was focused. There was no panic in it, only tightly controlled urgency. Lena blinked, the sound of his voice pulling her back from the edge of hysteria. I don't think so. Her own voice was thin, reedy, a stranger's voice. Talon tried to push himself up, his powerful frame betraying him as he swayed. On pure instinct, before thought could intervene, Lena scrambled across the sand to his side, her hands grabbing his arm to steady him. A shock ran through her. She had never touched him before. Not once in 6 months of marriage. Not a handshake, not a brush in passing. The fabric of his coat was rough and wet under her fingers. The arm beneath it was solid as stone, trembling with effort. Thank you. The words were barely a whisper, his voice softer than she had ever heard it. They stood there for a moment, suspended in the eerie quiet of the beach, the sound of waves and distant bird calls slowly returning. Talon's gaze swept their surroundings, his mind already working. She could see it in his eyes, the shift from victim to survivor. We need to check for others, he said, his voice regaining a fraction of its natural authority. But it was different now. It wasn't an order. It was a statement, almost a request for her agreement. Lena nodded, her mind still reeling. Together, they moved through the wreckage. They found 3 others. Captain Henrik Voss lay pinned beneath a section of the mainmast, his leg twisted at an angle that made Lena's stomach turn. His weathered face was pale, lips moving in silent prayer or delirium, she couldn't tell which. A young sailor named Marcus sat slumped against a rock, clutching his side where blood seeped between his fingers. The ship's cook, an older woman called Ada, was conscious but barely, her breathing shallow and labored. "Henrik," Talon said, kneeling beside the captain. His voice carried an unfamiliar gentleness. "We're going to get you out." It took an hour to free him. An hour of Talon and Lena working in grim silence, using pieces of wreckage as levers, their hands bleeding from splinters and sharp metal. When they finally pulled Henrik clear, his scream echoed across the empty beach, a sound that sent birds scattering from the jungle canopy. Lena tore strips from her already ruined dress, wrapping Henrik's mangled leg with shaking hands. She had no medical training, no knowledge beyond basic instinct. But Talon's steady presence beside her, his quiet instructions, his careful movements as he set the bone, gave her something to anchor to. Marcus died as the sun began to set. One moment he was breathing, the next, silence. Lena watched Talon close the young man's eyes with a tenderness that seemed impossible from the man she thought she knew. He sat back on his heels, jaw clenched, staring at nothing. "I should have checked him first," Talon said, his voice hollow. "Should have seen." "You couldn't have known," Lena interrupted, surprised by the firmness in her own voice. "You did everything you could." His eyes met hers, and for a moment, she saw something crack in that impenetrable facade. Grief. Raw and unguarded. They buried Marcus at the edge of the jungle as darkness fell. No words were spoken. What was there to say? The ocean had taken everything, their ship, their crew, their certainty. Words felt obscene in the face of such loss. Ada slipped away in the night. Lena woke to find Henrik weeping silently, his hand resting on the cook's still chest. The older woman had simply stopped breathing, her body finally surrendering to injuries Lena hadn't even known she carried. "She was my wife's sister," Henrik whispered when Lena approached. "Sailed with me for 20 years. They buried her beside Marcus as dawn painted the sky in shades of pearl and rose, a beauty that felt like mockery. 3 survivors. That's all that remained of the Serpent's Crown's crew of 47. Talon worked with mechanical focus throughout the morning. He salvaged what he could from the wreckage: canvas, rope, metal fixtures, anything that might prove useful. Lena watched him move with that same efficient precision she'd seen in boardrooms, now applied to survival. His fine clothes were ruined beyond recognition, his hands raw and bleeding, but he never slowed. "You need to rest," she finally said, her own exhaustion making her voice sharp. "We need shelter," he replied without looking up. "Water. Food. Rest comes after. You'll kill yourself. Then I'll die useful." He straightened, fixing her with those steel-gray eyes. But there was no coldness in them now. Only determination edged with something darker. Fear, perhaps. Or desperation. Lena felt anger flare in her chest, hot and sudden. 6 months of his dismissals, his coldness, his casual cruelty, and now he wanted to play the martyr? "Fine," she snapped. "Kill yourself. See if I care." She turned and stalked down the beach, her vision blurring with furious tears. How dare he? How dare he act like he could just... "Lena. Wait." His hand caught her arm, not roughly, but firmly. She spun to face him, ready to unleash months of pent-up resentment. But the words died on her lips. Talon looked utterly exhausted. The gash on his forehead had reopened, fresh blood trickling down his face. His shoulders sagged. And in his eyes, those eyes that had always assessed her and found her lacking, she saw something she never expected. Vulnerability. "I don't know how to do this," he said quietly. "How to be less. How to stop trying to control everything." He released her arm, running a hand through his salt-stiffened hair. "In my world, stopping means losing. Weakness means death." "This isn't your world anymore," Lena said, her anger deflating. This is, she gestured helplessly at the beach, the jungle, the vast emptiness around them. This is something neither of us knows. Exactly. His voice was barely above a whisper. And that terrifies me more than the storm did. The confession hung between them, raw and honest. Lena found herself studying him, really looking at him for the first time. Without the tailored suits and corporate armor, without the cold mask he wore like a second skin, Talon Blackwood was just a man. Scared. Grieving. Human. Then we learn together, she heard herself say. And we rest when we need to. Both of us. Something shifted in his expression. Relief, maybe. Or gratitude. Together, he repeated, and the word sounded like a promise. The fire was a small miracle. Lena sat watching flames dance to life under Talon's careful coaxing, feeling something close to hope for the first time since the shipwreck. He'd built it using techniques she didn't understand, friction and tinder and stubborn patience. Now it crackled between them, pushing back the encroaching darkness. Henrik slept fitfully nearby, his fever-bright face peaceful for the moment. They'd given him water, cleaned his wounds, done what little they could. Whether he'd survive the night was anyone's guess. Where did you learn that? Lena asked, nodding at the fire. Talon didn't look up from the flames. My father. Before he became consumed with building his shipping empire, he used to take me hunting in the Northern Territories. Said a man should know how to survive with nothing but what the earth provided. You never mentioned your father. We don't speak. A muscle tightened in his jaw. Haven't in 10 years. Lena wanted to ask why, but something in his expression stopped her. Instead, she moved closer to the fire, wrapping her arms around herself against the night chill. Cold? Talon asked. I'm fine. He studied her for a moment, then began shrugging out of his ruined coat, the last layer he had that wasn't completely shredded. Don't, Lena protested immediately. You'll freeze. I'm warmer than you are. It was a simple statement of fact, delivered in that matter-of-fact tone she'd heard him use in business negotiations. But softer somehow. Talon. Please. The word stopped her. She'd never heard him say please. Not once in 6 months. Slowly, Lena reached out and took the coat. She pulled it over her shoulders, and warmth, his warmth, enveloped her. It smelled of salt and smoke and something underneath that was distinctly him. The scent was oddly comforting. Thank you, she whispered. He nodded, returning his attention to the fire. But Lena noticed the tremors starting in his shoulders, the way he rubbed his arms against the cold. Guilt twisted in her chest. On the Serpent's Crown, in their separate cabins and careful distance, this would have been simple. She would have kept the coat, he would have suffered in silence, and the wall between them would have remained intact. But here, with Henrik's labored breathing and the jungle's whispers and the terrible weight of survival pressing down on them both, here, the old rules felt absurd. Before she could second-guess the impulse, Lena stood and moved to Talon's side of the fire. She sat close enough that their shoulders almost touched. What are you doing? He asked, confusion crossing his features. Sharing. She draped the coat over both of them, creating a makeshift shelter against the night. Their bodies pressed together, hip to hip, shoulder to shoulder, sharing heat in the small space beneath the fabric. Talon went very still. Lena could feel his heart beat, strong and steady against her side. Could feel the tremors in his muscles gradually easing as warmth built between them. The intimacy was staggering, more profound than anything in their wedding night, which had been perfunctory at best. You don't have to, he started. I know. Silence fell, broken only by the fire's crackle and the distant sound of waves. Then, slowly, Talon's weight shifted. He leaned into her, just slightly, just enough that she knew it was deliberate. An acceptance. A surrender. Lena's heart began a heavy, frantic rhythm. She was acutely aware of every point of contact, the solid warmth of him, the rise and fall of his breathing, the tension gradually leaving his frame. She had hated Talon Blackwood. Built 6 months of quiet resentment around that hatred. It was the foundation of their marriage. But the man sitting beside her now, vulnerable, exhausted, trusting her with his warmth, she didn't know him at all. And as she sat there beneath an unfamiliar sky, sharing heat and silence, a terrifying thought took root. Maybe she'd never known him to begin with. Morning came with Henrik's screams. Lena jerked awake, the coat sliding from her shoulders. Beside her, Talon was already moving, crossing the sand to where Henrik thrashed against his makeshift splint. The old captain's fever had worsened overnight, his skin burned to the touch, his eyes unfocused and wild. "Hold him," Talon commanded, his voice sharp with urgency. Lena scrambled to help, pressing Henrik's shoulders down as gently as she could while Talon examined the leg. The smell hit her first, sweet and rotten. Infection. The wound had festered despite their efforts, dark lines spreading from the break like poisoned rivers beneath his skin. "We need clean water," Talon said, jaw tight. "Cloth. Something to draw out the infection." "We have nothing." "Then we find something." He stood abruptly, scanning the beach with that calculating gaze she recognized from boardrooms. "Assessing. Planning. There." He pointed toward the jungle. "Fresh water has to come from somewhere inland. I'll search for a stream." "Not alone, you won't." His eyes snapped to hers. "Someone needs to stay with Henrik. Someone needs to make sure you don't get lost in there and leave us both stranded." Lena stood, brushing sand from her ruined dress. "We go together or not at all." For a moment, she thought he'd argue. The old Talon would have dismissed her concerns and issued orders until she complied. But this version, stripped of his armor and authority, simply nodded. Together, then. The jungle was a cathedral of green hostility. Massive trees rose like pillars, their canopy so dense that sunlight filtered through in scattered fragments. Vines thick as Lena's arm hung between trunks, creating a maze of obstacles. The air was thick, humid, pressing against her skin like a living thing. Every sound seemed magnified, the snap of branches underfoot, the rustle of unseen creatures in the undergrowth, her own labored breathing. Talon moved ahead, using a piece of metal from the wreckage to hack through vegetation. His movements were efficient but unpracticed. Twice he led them in circles. Once he nearly stepped on a snake that sent them both scrambling backward. "Some wilderness expert," Lena muttered, her nerves fraying. He stopped, shoulders tensing. "If you have a better idea." "Listen." She held up a hand. Beneath the cacophony of jungle sounds, there was something else. A whisper. A murmur. Water. Running water. They found the stream 15 minutes later, a narrow ribbon of clear water cutting through moss-covered rocks. Talon dropped to his knees, cupping water to his mouth before Lena could stop him. "Wait, what if it's not safe?" He swallowed, then looked up at her with something almost like amusement. "Then I suppose we'll find out together." The absurdity of it hit her suddenly. Here they were, possibly drinking poisoned water, miles from civilization, with a dying man on the beach. And Talon was almost smiling. The hysteria bubbled up before she could stop it, laughter that bordered on tears. "What's funny?" he asked, but his lips were twitching. "Everything. Nothing. Us." She knelt beside him, scooping water into her own hands. It was cold, clean-tasting. The most delicious thing she'd ever experienced. 6 months ago, we couldn't stand to be in the same room. Now we're drinking potentially deadly water together. "Progress," Talon said dryly. Despite everything, Lena found herself laughing again. Real laughter this time. They filled every container they'd salvaged, a dented cooking pot, a leather flask, even Talon's boots, and hauled them back to camp. Henrik drank greedily, but the fever didn't break. The infection had spread too far, too fast. He died 3 days later. They buried Henrik beside Ada and Marcus, 3 graves now marking the edge between beach and jungle. Talon said words over him, something about the sea and eternal rest, but his voice cracked halfway through. He turned away before Lena could see his face, but she saw his hands trembling. That night, he didn't return to the fire until long after dark. Lena found him sitting on a piece of driftwood at the water's edge, staring at nothing. The moon painted silver lines across the waves, across the rigid set of his shoulders. "It's not your fault," she said quietly, sitting beside him without asking permission. "I was responsible for them. The captain. The crew. This voyage was my idea, my route, Your arrogance." The words came out sharper than intended, months of buried resentment surfacing. "Is that what you were going to say? That your need to control everything, to prove yourself the most powerful man in every room, killed them?" He flinched as if she'd struck him. Lena immediately regretted it, but the floodgates had opened. "You want to know why I hated you, Talon? It wasn't because you were cold. It was because you made me feel invisible. Like I was just another asset on your ledger. Property you'd acquired through a business transaction." "That's what you were," he said flatly. "That's what the marriage was." "I know." The words came out as a sob. "I know that's all I was to you. My family's connections in exchange for your money. A transaction. But I was still a person, Talon. I had thoughts and dreams and—" "I know." She stopped, stunned. "What?" "I know you're a person." He finally looked at her, and his eyes were raw. "I've always known. That was the problem. I don't understand." Talon exhaled slowly, running both hands through his hair. "My father taught me that caring about people was weakness. That business required distance, calculation. When he arranged our marriage before he died, it was his final lesson. Take the girl, secure the trade routes, feel nothing." His voice was bitter. "I followed that lesson perfectly. And then you walked into my study on our wedding day, and you looked at me with such hope in your eyes, and I—" He broke off, jaw working. "You what?" Lena pressed, her heart hammering. "I was terrified," he admitted. "Because I wanted to care. Wanted to know you, to talk to you, to—" He shook his head sharply. "But I'd spent my entire life learning not to want those things. So I did what I knew how to do. I built walls. Kept you at a distance. Made sure you'd never see how weak I actually was." Lena sat in stunned silence. All this time, she'd thought his coldness was contempt. She'd never imagined it might be fear. "You weren't weak," she said finally. "You were a coward." He laughed, a harsh, broken sound. "Yes, I was. Past tense. I'm trying." He met her eyes. "Here, with nothing left to hide behind, I'm trying to be something other than what he made me." The honesty in his voice was staggering. Lena felt 6 months of assumptions crumbling, leaving her unsteady and uncertain. Who was this man beside her? And who could they have been if he'd had this courage before? "I hated you," she said quietly. "For making me feel worthless. For treating our marriage like a business merger." "I know. But I'm starting to think I hated the wrong person. I hated the mask, not the man wearing it." Talon turned to face her fully, moonlight catching in his eyes. "And now? Now that the mask is gone?" Lena considered the question. Considered this man who built fires and found water and wept over the dead. Who confessed his fears instead of hiding them. Who was trying, clumsily and desperately, to be better than he'd been. "Now," she said slowly, "I'm starting to understand why you wore it." Something eased in his expression, not quite forgiveness, but perhaps the beginning of understanding. They sat together until the moon set, talking in fits and starts. Talon told her about his father's cruelty, the impossible standards, the punishments for showing emotion. Lena shared her own childhood, being groomed as a bargaining chip, her education limited to what would make her a suitable wife, her dreams dismissed as foolishness. "I wanted to travel," she confessed. "To see the world beyond ballrooms and business dinners. To matter for something other than my family name." "You matter," Talon said quietly. "You've always mattered. I just didn't know how to show you that. Show me now." He held out his hand, palm up. An offering. A question. After a moment's hesitation, Lena placed her hand in his. They walked back to the fire together, fingers intertwined, the distance between them feeling smaller than it ever had before. That night, They slept on opposite sides of the same fire instead of in separate spaces. It was a small thing, a matter of a few feet, but it felt monumental. Like crossing an invisible border into new territory. Before sleep claimed her, Lena looked across the flames at Talon's face, peaceful in the firelight, and felt something shift in her chest. Not love, not yet. But the possibility of it. The small, fragile seed of something that might grow if they tended it carefully. She'd hated her cold husband. But perhaps, just perhaps, she might learn to love the man he was becoming. The fever came on suddenly. One moment Talon was hauling driftwood for their shelter, the next he was doubled over, retching violently into the sand. Lena rushed to his side as he collapsed, his skin burning to the touch even in the tropical heat. "I'm fine," he gasped, trying to stand. His legs gave out. "You're not fine." Lena caught him, staggering under his weight. "What's wrong?" "Don't." Another spasm racked his body. This time when he vomited, there was blood mixed with the bile. Dysentery. The word surfaced from some half-forgotten lesson. Contaminated water or food. Without treatment, it could kill within days. Lena's mind raced, panic clawing at her throat. She managed to drag Talon to their shelter, his body shaking with violent tremors. Within an hour, his fever spiked so high she thought his skin would burn her fingers. Delirium set in by nightfall. "Father, please," he muttered, thrashing against the sand. "I tried. I did everything you asked. It's never enough." "Why is it never enough?" Lena pressed a water-soaked cloth to his forehead, her hands shaking. She had a choice to make. Talon was incapacitated, possibly dying. She could take what supplies they had, improve her own chances of survival. Part of her, the part that remembered 6 months of emotional cruelty, of being made to feel like nothing, whispered that she should. He wouldn't hesitate if the situation were reversed. Would he? But even as the thought formed, she knew it was a lie. The man burning with fever before her wasn't the cold tyrant from the boardroom. He'd given her his coat in the freezing night. He'd wept over Henrik's grave. He'd confessed his fears instead of hiding them. And more than that, leaving him to die would mean facing this island alone. She wasn't sure she could survive that. Wasn't sure she wanted to try. "Damn you, Talon Blackwood," she whispered, wringing out the cloth. "Damn you for making me care." The next 3 days blurred into an exhausting routine. Lena kept a constant fire burning, boiled water until her eyes burned from the smoke, searched the jungle for plants that might help. She remembered her grandmother once speaking of herbs with healing properties, something about bitter leaves and fever. She gathered everything that seemed remotely promising, crushing leaves into paste, coaxing Talon to swallow when he was conscious enough to drink. Most of the time, he wasn't conscious. He raved in his delirium, fragments of his past spilling out in fevered confessions. His father's cruelty. Beatings for showing weakness. Being locked in a cellar for crying at his mother's funeral. A lifetime of learning that love was liability, that emotion was ammunition others would use against you. "Couldn't let her see," he muttered one night, his voice raw. "Couldn't let Lena see how much he broke off, thrashing. "How much you what?" Lena whispered, but he'd slipped back into incoherent mumbling. She barely slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she jolted awake in panic, checking that he was still breathing. Her own body screamed with exhaustion, ribs aching, hands blistered from gathering firewood, muscles trembling from hauling water. On the third night, the fever finally broke. Lena woke to find Talon's eyes open, clear and focused for the first time in days. He was staring at her, his expression unreadable. "How long?" His voice was a ruined whisper. 3 days. Lena sat up, every muscle protesting. "You nearly died." He absorbed this in silence, his gaze moving to the fire, the carefully organized supplies, the pile of crushed herbs beside him. Then back to her face, taking in the dark circles under her eyes, the exhaustion written in every line of her body. "Why did you stay?" he asked quietly. The question hung in the air between them. Lena could have lied, could have given him the practical answer about survival and strength in numbers. Instead, she found herself telling the truth. Because if you died, I'd be alone. She met his eyes. And because you didn't deserve to die like that. Nobody does. Even after everything I did to you. Even after. She picked up the water flask, helping him drink. Besides, I've invested too much effort keeping you alive to let you die now. Consider it sunk cost. The corner of his mouth twitched, almost a smile. Very businesslike of you. I learned from the best. The words came out softer than intended. Talon's hand found hers, his grip weak but deliberate. Thank you. For not leaving me. Don't thank me yet. You still owe me 3 days of work. This time he did smile, and something warm unfurled in Lena's chest at the sight. Recovery was slow. For the first time in their strange partnership, their roles reversed completely. Talon, always strong, always in control, was weak as a newborn. Lena became the provider, the decision-maker, the one who kept them alive. She learned quickly which fruits were safe to eat and which caused stomach cramps. How to set snares for small animals using wire from the wreckage. How to predict weather changes by watching the birds and the way the wind shifted. As Talon's strength returned, he watched her with something like wonder in his eyes. You're remarkable, he said one afternoon, watching her gut a fish with practiced efficiency. How did you learn all this? Necessity. Lena rinsed her hands in seawater. And I pay attention. The island teaches, if you're willing to listen. Teach me. So she did. Showed him which plants had medicinal properties, how to weave palm fronds into waterproof thatch, where to find the freshest water in the stream. In turn, as his strength returned, Talon taught her what he knew, how to build a proper fire in the rain, how to sharpen tools using stone, how to read the stars for direction. They became students of each other's knowledge, and in teaching, something shifted. The careful distance they'd maintained began to close. One evening, Talon was showing Lena how to make a proper spear, his hands guiding hers through the motions of binding stone to wood. He stood close behind her, his chest nearly touching her back, his breath warm against her ear as he murmured instructions. Like this, angle it slightly left. There. Lena's hands stilled. She was acutely aware of every point where their bodies almost touched, of the heat radiating from him, of her own quickening pulse. She turned her head slightly, and suddenly his face was inches from hers. Their eyes met. Held. For a suspended moment, neither breathed. Talon's gaze dropped to her lips, then back to her eyes, a question, a possibility. Lena felt herself swaying toward him, drawn by something stronger than logic or caution. Then a log in the fire popped loudly, breaking the spell. They stepped apart quickly, both suddenly fascinated by different horizons. The moment passed, but its echo lingered, a promise of something neither was quite ready to name. That night, sitting by the fire, Talon broke the comfortable silence. I've been thinking about what you said. About being invisible in our marriage. Lena looked up from the net she was repairing. Talon, you don't have to. I do. He stared into the flames. You asked me once why I agreed to marry you. I said it was my father's final order. That was true, but not the whole truth. Then what was? I was afraid, he admitted. When I met you at the betrothal dinner, you were so alive. Full of opinions and questions and fire. Everything my father had beaten out of me. And I thought, he paused, jaw working. I thought if I let myself care about you, you'd see how hollow I was underneath. How much of me was just performance and armor. So I kept you at a distance before you could discover there was nothing worth knowing. Lena's throat tightened. There was always something worth knowing. You just never let me look. I'm letting you look now. I know. She set aside the net, moving to sit beside him. And for the record? You're not hollow. You never were. Just, locked away. And now. Now. She bumped her shoulder against his gently. Now you're like this island. Difficult, sometimes dangerous, but with hidden treasures if you know where to look. Talon laughed, a real laugh, warm and genuine. Did you just compare me to a hostile jungle? If the comparison fits. They sat in comfortable silence, shoulders touching, watching the fire dance. The air between them felt different now, charged with possibility but also with patience. They had time. The island had stripped away their old lives, their old roles. What they built from here would be their choice. We're in this together now, Lena said quietly. Really together. Not like before. Not like before, Talon agreed. His hand found hers in the darkness, fingers intertwining. Partners. Partners. It wasn't love. Not yet. But it was trust, hard-won and genuine. And perhaps, Lena thought, that was a better foundation than passion ever could be. The fire crackled between them, pushing back the jungle darkness, and for the first time since the shipwreck, the future felt like something other than mere survival. It felt like hope. The tracks appeared on the 6th week. Lena was the first to notice them, massive paw prints pressed deep into the mud near their water source. 4 toes, each pad the size of her palm, with claw marks extending beyond. She'd seen drawings of such prints in her father's hunting journals. Jaguar. Or something worse. Talon, she called, her voice carefully controlled despite the ice flooding her veins. He was beside her in seconds, following her pointing finger. His jaw tightened as he crouched, measuring the print with his hand. Fresh. Within the last few hours. How big? Big enough. He stood, scanning the jungle with new wariness. We need to be more careful. No one goes anywhere alone. Over the following days, they found more signs. Deep claw marks scored into tree trunks at shoulder height, territorial markings. The remains of a wild pig, half-eaten and left to rot, its ribcage cracked open with brutal efficiency. Scat containing bone fragments and fur. The island, which had seemed merely indifferent to their presence, now felt actively hostile. They began carrying makeshift weapons everywhere, sharpened stakes, heavy branches, anything that might serve as defense. The fire stayed burning day and night, a protective circle of light against whatever watched from the darkness. It's hunting us, Lena said one evening, watching shadows dance beyond the firelight. It's hunting everything, Talon corrected, but his hand rested on the spear beside him. We just need to be smart. Stay together. Don't give it an opportunity. Lena nodded, but fear had taken root in her chest, a cold, gnawing thing that made every sound suspect, every shadow threatening. The encounter came without warning. Lena was gathering fruit near the stream, staying within sight of their camp as Talon had insisted. The midday sun filtered through the canopy, creating dappled patterns on the ground. Birds sang in the branches. Everything seemed peaceful, normal. Then the birds went silent. The sudden absence of sound was deafening. Lena straightened slowly, every instinct screaming danger. Her eyes scanned the undergrowth, searching for. The growl came from directly behind her. Low. Rumbling. A sound that bypassed thought and struck straight into primal terror. Lena turned slowly, her body moving through molasses, and found herself face to face with death. The jaguar was massive, easily 200 pounds of muscle and spotted fur. Old scars crisscrossed its muzzle, testament to a lifetime of kills. Its golden eyes fixed on her with predatory intelligence, calculating. Measuring. One ear was torn, half missing. This was an apex predator, scarred and experienced and utterly confident in its dominance. Lena couldn't breathe. Couldn't scream. Her body had frozen, some animal part of her brain understanding that running meant death, that any movement might trigger the attack. The jaguar took a step forward, lips pulling back to reveal yellowed fangs. Time crystallized into perfect, terrible clarity. This was how she would die. Torn apart on a jungle floor, miles from civilization, her bones scattered and picked clean. No one would ever know what happened to her. The jaguar's haunches bunched, preparing to spring. Then the world exploded into motion and sound. Lena. Talon burst from the jungle, roaring like something wild himself, waving a burning branch above his head. Fire scattered embers through the air. He charged straight at the jaguar without hesitation, his face twisted into a snarl of pure rage. The jaguar pivoted, startled by this sudden threat. It snarled back, a sound that vibrated in Lena's chest. For a heart-stopping moment, she thought it would attack Talon instead, thought she'd watch him die saving her. But predators understand fire. Understand threats. The jaguar hissed once more, then melted back into the undergrowth, golden eyes glinting with promise rather than retreat. It wasn't fleeing. It was choosing another moment. Talon didn't wait to see if it would return. He grabbed Lena's arm and ran, pulling her through the jungle back toward camp. Branches whipped her face. Roots caught her feet. She stumbled repeatedly, but Talon's grip never faltered, dragging her forward until they burst into the clearing of their camp. Only then did he release her, spinning to face the jungle, the flaming branch still held high and ready. They stood there, both breathing hard, waiting for the attack that didn't come. When Lena's legs finally gave out, Talon caught her. She collapsed against his chest, her entire body shaking with delayed shock. Sobs she couldn't control tore from her throat, huge, gasping things that felt like they might turn her inside out. Talon's arms wrapped around her, one hand cradling her head against his shoulder. "I've got you," he murmured into her hair. "You're safe. I've got you." "You could have been killed," Lena choked out between sobs. "You just charged at it, you didn't even think." "Of course I didn't think." His voice was fierce. "I heard you scream." "I didn't scream." "Then I heard you not screaming, and I knew something was wrong." He pulled back just enough to cup her face in his hands, forcing her to meet his eyes. "Did you honestly think I would let anything happen to you? That I wouldn't come?" The intensity in his gaze stole her breath. This wasn't the cold businessman or even the careful survivor they'd been building together. This was something raw and primal and completely unguarded. "You matter, Lena," he said, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "You matter more than anything. Do you understand that?" She nodded, unable to form words around the tightness in her throat. Talon's thumb brushed away her tears with such gentleness it made her want to cry harder. Then, slowly, he pulled her back against his chest, holding her while the tremors gradually subsided. "I thought I was going to watch you die," she finally whispered. "When it turned toward you, I thought." "I know." His grip tightened. "But we're both here. We're both alive. This time." "This time," he agreed. "So we make sure there isn't a next time." They spent the rest of the day fortifying their camp. Talon worked with focused intensity, building a barrier of sharpened stakes. Around their sleeping area, Lena helped him weave thorny vines between the posts, creating a fence that might slow, if not stop, an attack. They moved their fire closer to the shelter, building a secondary one on the opposite side to create a corridor of light. As the sun set, transforming the sky into shades of purple and gold, they stood back to survey their work. "It's not much," Talon said. "It's something." Lena picked up one of the spears they'd made. "And we'll take turns keeping watch. Neither of us sleeps without someone on guard." Agreed. That night, Lena took the first watch. She sat with her back to the fire, spear across her knees, staring into the darkness beyond their protective barriers. Every sound made her jump, the snap of a twig, the rustle of leaves, the distant call of night birds. The jungle was alive with movement, and any of it could be death approaching. "You should rest," Talon said softly behind her. She turned to find him sitting up, sleep clearly eluding him as well. "So should you." "Can't." He moved to sit beside her, his own spear in hand. "Every time I close my eyes, I see that thing lunging at you. Every time I close mine, I see it lunging at you." They shared a look of understanding. Some fears couldn't be reasoned away or ignored. They could only be endured. "Then we'll watch together," Talon said. It wasn't a question. Lena nodded, grateful beyond words. They sat shoulder to shoulder, two small humans huddled against the vastness of a hostile world. The fire crackled between them and the darkness, pushing back shadows that seemed to press closer with each passing hour. Sometime after midnight, Lena felt Talon's hand find hers. His fingers intertwined with hers, warm, solid, real. An anchor in the darkness. She squeezed back, and neither of them let go. They sat that way until dawn, holding onto each other, keeping watch over their small island of safety in a sea of danger. The jaguar didn't return, but its presence haunted the edges of the firelight, a reminder that survival was never guaranteed. But for the first time since the shipwreck, Lena realized something profound. She wasn't just surviving because she had to. She was surviving because she wanted to. Because the man beside her, with his hand wrapped around hers and his body positioned to shield her from threats, had become someone worth surviving for. The island had brought them to the edge of death. But somehow, impossibly, it had also brought them to the edge of something else. Something that felt dangerously close to love. The days blurred into weeks, measured not by calendars but by the rhythm of survival. Rise with the sun. Tend the fire. Gather food. Reinforce defenses. Sleep in shifts. Repeat. But the nights became something else entirely. As the moon waxed and waned above their small camp, Lena and Talon began to talk. Really talk. Not the careful, polite exchanges of their marriage or even the practical discussions of survival, but deep, honest conversations that stretched into the early hours of morning. It started simply enough. Talon was carving a new spear point, his hands moving with practiced precision in the firelight, when Lena asked, "What was your father really like?" His hands stilled. For a long moment, she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, slowly, he set down the half-finished spear. "Brutal," he said quietly, in ways that never left marks people could see. The story came out in fragments, pieces of a shattered childhood he'd never spoken of before. A father who saw him not as a son but as an extension of his own ambition. Beatings for showing emotion. Being locked in the wine cellar for hours, sometimes days, whenever he cried or complained. Learning that love was leverage, that caring about anything gave others power over you. "I was 8 when my mother died," Talon said, his voice hollow. "I sobbed at her funeral. My father waited until we got home, then locked me in that cellar for 3 days. Said I'd embarrassed him. Made him look weak. He stared into the fire. When he finally let me out, he said, 'A blackwood feels nothing. Remember that.'" Lena felt tears burning behind her eyes. "That's not strength. That's cruelty. I know that now." He looked at her, his eyes reflecting firelight. "But for 20 years, it was all I knew. Every instinct I had to care about people, to connect with them, he crushed it. Systematically. Until I became exactly what he wanted. A machine that made money and felt nothing. But you're not that anymore." "No." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "You made sure of that." "I didn't do anything." "You stayed," he interrupted. "When I had the fever. When you could have left. You stayed and took care of me, and I couldn't understand why. In my father's world, you should have abandoned me. It would have been the smart choice." He reached across the space between them, his fingers brushing her hand. "You staying broke something in me. Or maybe fixed something. I still can't tell which." Lena turned her hand over, letting their palms press together. "Maybe both." The next night, Lena found herself telling him about her own childhood. About being groomed from birth to be a suitable wife, educated just enough to be interesting at dinner parties but not enough to have opinions that mattered. How her dreams of travel, of independence, of mattering for something other than her family name were dismissed as childish fantasies. "My mother started marriage negotiations when I was 15, she said bitterly. "I remember her saying, 'You're blessed with beauty and breeding, Lena. Don't ruin it by developing ideas above your station.' That's unconscionable. That's reality. For women in our world, anyway." She pulled her knees to her chest. "When my father announced the engagement to you, everyone congratulated me. Said I'd done well for myself. Landed a wealthy husband." Her laugh was harsh. "No one asked if I wanted it. If I wanted you. Did you?" The question was soft. "I didn't know you. How could I want or not want someone I'd never met?" She met his eyes across the fire. "But I hoped. God, I hoped maybe you'd be different. That maybe we could build something real despite how it started. And then I crushed that hope. Thoroughly." But there was no venom in her voice now, just sadness for what they'd lost. Every cold word, every dismissal, every time you looked through me like I was furniture, it confirmed everything I'd feared. That I'd never be more than property. An asset. Talon was quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. I noticed you the day we met. Lena's head snapped up. What? At the betrothal dinner. You were wearing a green dress, and you were arguing with your father about something, politics, I think. He kept trying to shush you, but you wouldn't stop. You had this fire in your eyes, this passion. He smiled sadly. You terrified me. I terrified you. You were everything I'd been taught to destroy in myself. Emotional. Honest. Alive. He stood, pacing restlessly. I wanted to know everything about you. Wanted to ask what books you read, what you thought about, what made you laugh. But my father's voice was in my head. Caring is weakness. Emotion is ammunition. So instead, You made sure I could never get close enough to hurt you. Yes. He stopped pacing, facing her. And in doing so, I hurt you in exactly the ways I'd been hurt. Became the thing I hated most. His voice broke. I'm so sorry, Lena. For all of it. She stood, crossing the space between them. You were a coward, she said plainly. He flinched but nodded. Yes. But you're not anymore. She placed her hand on his chest, feeling his heartbeat strong and fast beneath her palm. The man who charged at a jaguar to save me? Who confesses his fears instead of hiding them. That's not cowardice. I'm trying, he whispered. To be someone worthy of you. You already are. The rainstorm hit 3 days later with tropical fury. They'd been gathering firewood when the sky opened, drenching them in seconds. Thunder cracked so close Lena felt it in her bones. Lightning illuminated the jungle in harsh, flickering frames. The cave. Talon shouted over the roar. Run. They'd discovered the small cave weeks ago, barely large enough for 2 people but dry and sheltered. They stumbled inside, soaked and shivering, as the storm unleashed its full fury outside. Water poured off the rocks above them in sheets, creating a curtain that sealed them off from the world. In the sudden intimacy of the small space, Lena became acutely aware of every point where their bodies touched, hip pressed against hip, shoulder against shoulder. Are you cold? Talon asked, his voice low. She was trembling, but not entirely from the chill. A little. Without a word, he wrapped his arm around her shoulders, pulling her against his side. Heat radiated from him despite his wet clothes. Lena let herself lean into him, her head finding the hollow of his shoulder as if it had been made to fit there. They sat in silence, listening to the storm rage. Talon's hand moved absently, fingers tracing patterns on her arm that sent shivers through her that had nothing to do with temperature. Lena, he said quietly, there's something I never told you. What? I write poetry. He said it like a confession. Have since I was a boy. It was the only soft thing I allowed myself. The only place I could feel without punishment. Will you share some with me? He was quiet for a moment, then began to speak, his voice low and rhythmic. In the silence of prescribed halls, where emotion dies and duty calls, I built my walls of ice and stone, and learned to live forever alone. But shipwrecked on this savage shore, where masks and armor mean no more, I found that walls, however tall, were always meant to one day fall. The words hung in the air between them, raw and beautiful. Lena's throat tightened with emotion. That's for me, she whispered. It wasn't a question. Everything is for you now. She lifted her head, finding his eyes inches from hers. The air between them crackled with more than electricity from the storm. Talon's gaze dropped to her lips, then back to her eyes, a question, a request for permission. Lena's answer was to close the distance. Their lips met softly, tentatively. Not the practiced kiss of their wedding ceremony, but something new and uncertain and infinitely more real. Talon's hand came up to cup her face, his touch gentle as if she might break. When they finally parted, both were breathing hard. I don't know how to do this, he admitted, his forehead resting against hers. How to love someone without fear. Neither do I. Lena's hands fisted in his wet shirt. But maybe we learn together. Together, he echoed, and kissed her again. This time there was less hesitation, more certainty. His arms wrapped around her, pulling her fully against him. She went willingly, months of distance collapsing into this single moment of connection. The kiss deepened, and Lena felt something break open in her chest, not the walls she'd built against him, but the door she'd kept locked against hope. When they finally broke apart, both were trembling. We should, Talon started. Not yet, Lena interrupted. Just hold me, please. So he did. They lay down on the cave floor, his body curled protectively around hers, and held each other as the storm raged outside. It wasn't about desire, though that hummed beneath their skin, but about something deeper. About two people who'd been starved for connection their entire lives finally allowing themselves to have it. I love you, Talon whispered into her hair as exhaustion finally claimed them. I've been trying not to, but I do. Lena smiled against his chest. I love you too, even though you're still infuriating sometimes. His quiet laugh rumbled through her. Only sometimes. Don't push your luck, Blackwood. They fell asleep wrapped in each other, the storm their lullaby, and for the first time since the shipwreck, both slept deeply and without fear. The island had stripped away everything false between them. What remained was real, raw, and finally ready to grow. The birds left first. Lena noticed their absence during the morning water run, no calls echoing through the canopy, no rustling in the undergrowth. The jungle, usually alive with sound, had gone eerily silent. Talon, she called, returning to camp. Something's wrong. He looked up from the fish he was cleaning, immediately alert. What? The birds. They are gone. All of them. Talon stood slowly, his gaze sweeping the tree line. His expression shifted from curiosity to concern to something harder. Fear. He walked to the edge of their camp, studying the sky. The clouds were building to the east, massive towers of gray and black that seemed to pulse with malevolent energy. We need to move, he said suddenly, his voice tight. Now. What? Why? Hurricane. He was already gathering supplies, moving with frantic efficiency. I've seen this before, the animals fleeing, the pressure in the air. We have maybe 6 hours. Maybe less. Lena's stomach dropped. 6 hours to do what? Get to the cave. Take everything we can carry. Everything else, he gestured at their carefully built camp, months of work. Everything else we leave. They worked in desperate synchronization, dismantling their life on the beach. Food stores, weapons, the canvas they'd salvaged, anything that might help them survive. Talon insisted on multiple trips, refusing to leave supplies behind that might mean the difference between life and death. The wind picked up as they made their final journey, hot and gusty, carrying the smell of rain and something else, something primal and dangerous. The ocean had transformed from blue-green to slate-gray, waves building into white-capped mountains. Faster, Talon urged, half dragging their supplies up the jungle path. They reached the cave as the first drops fell, fat, heavy things that hit like stones. Within minutes, it became a deluge. They huddled at the cave entrance, watching their beach camp disappear beneath sheets of rain. Will it hold? Lena asked, eyeing the cave's rocky ceiling. It has to. Talon pulled her deeper inside, stacking supplies to create a barrier against the entrance. Stay away from the opening. If the wind shifts. The rest of his words were swallowed by a roar that seemed to come from the earth itself. The hurricane hit like the end of the world. Wind shrieked through the jungle with a voice that was almost human, 1,000 screaming souls. Trees that had stood for centuries bent impossibly, then snapped with reports like cannon fire. Rain fell not in drops but in solid sheets, turning the air itself into water. The very ground shook with the force of it. Lena pressed herself against the back of the cave, hands over her ears, but nothing could block out the sound. It was apocalyptic. Biblical. The fury of nature unleashed without mercy or restraint. Something massive crashed past the cave entrance, a tree, torn from its roots and flung like a toy. Debris flew through the air, lethal projectiles spinning in the chaos. A boulder the size of their shelter rolled past, gouging a trench in the earth. "Talon," she screamed, but couldn't hear her own voice. He was suddenly there, his body covering hers, pressing her against the cave wall as the entrance became a maelstrom of wind and water and destruction. His arms wrapped around her head, protecting her as smaller debris peppered the cave. Hours passed. Or maybe days. Time lost meaning in the roaring darkness. Lena clung to Talon, and he clung to her, two humans made insignificant by forces they could never hope to control. She could feel his heart hammering against her back, could feel the tremors running through his powerful frame. This was different from the shipwreck. That had been sudden, violent, over in minutes. This was sustained torture, hours of nature screaming its dominance, reminding them how small they were, how fragile their survival. A crack of thunder so loud it felt like being inside an explosion. Lightning illuminated the cave in harsh white light. In that flash, Lena saw Talon's face, stark, determined, terrified. "Lena," he shouted directly into her ear, his voice barely audible over the roar. "If we don't survive this. Don't." She tried to cover his mouth, but he caught her hand. "I need to say it." His grip was almost painful. "I love you. Do you hear me? I love you. Not because we're married, not because of survival or proximity or any logical reason. I love you because you're fierce and brilliant and brave. Because you make me want to be better than I was. Because you've made me feel again, made me want to feel, even when it hurts." Tears streamed down Lena's face, mixing with rain. "You can't do this. You can't say these things when we might die. Especially when we might die." He cupped her face in his hands, forcing her to meet his eyes. "I wasted 6 months being too afraid to love you. I won't waste whatever time we have left. I love you, Lena Corsair. I love you, and if I die, I want the last thing I ever said to be the truth." "You stubborn, impossible," a sob caught in her throat. "I love you too. I fought it so hard. Told myself I could never love you after everything. But I do. God help me, I do. You've broken down every wall I built, every defense, and I." The wind shifted with a scream, and suddenly water was pouring into the cave. Not rain but a torrent, flooding the entrance. Talon grabbed Lena and pulled her to the highest point in the cave as water swirled around their ankles, their knees, rising with terrifying speed. "Hold on to me," he commanded, bracing himself against the rock wall. She wrapped her arms around him as water climbed to their waists. Supplies floated past, their food, their tools, everything they'd salvaged. Talon's grip never loosened, his body a barrier between her and the flood. "I'm not letting go," he said fiercely into her ear. "Do you hear me? I'm not letting go." "Neither am I," she gasped back. They held each other as the hurricane raged, as water rose and wind howled and the world tried to tear them apart. But they'd survived too much to surrender now. They'd found each other in the wreckage of their old lives, had built something real from the ruins. The island could take everything else, but it couldn't take this. It couldn't take them. Dawn came quietly. The wind died first, its shrieking fading to a whisper, then to nothing. The rain slowed, stopped. Silence descended, profound and almost painful after hours of chaos. Lena stirred against Talon's chest, every muscle screaming. They were soaked, exhausted, but alive. The water had receded during the night, leaving behind mud and debris. "Is it over?" she whispered. "I think so." Talon's voice was hoarse. He loosened his grip carefully, as if afraid she might disappear. They stumbled to the cave entrance together, blinking in the sudden light. The world had been reborn. The jungle was unrecognizable, trees stripped of leaves, whole sections flattened as if by a giant's hand. The beach where they'd lived had been completely reshaped, new sandbars created, old landmarks erased. Their camp was gone, scattered across miles of coastline. But the sun was rising, painting the devastated landscape in shades of gold and pink. And they were here to see it. Talon took her hand, intertwining their fingers. We survived. We did. Lena looked at him, truly looked at him. The man beside her bore little resemblance to the cold magnate she'd married. This Talon was scarred, weathered, his expensive clothes replaced by rags and sun-darkened skin. But his eyes held warmth she'd never seen in their old life. Love, freely given. What now? She asked. He pulled her close, pressing a kiss to her forehead, her cheeks, finally her lips. Now we rebuild. Together. Like we've done everything else. Together, she echoed against his mouth. They stood at the cave entrance, battered but unbroken, watching the sun rise over their transformed island. The hurricane had taken everything they'd built, every comfort they'd salvaged. But it had also washed away the last remnants of who they'd been before. The cold businessman and resentful wife were gone, scoured away by wind and water and truth. What remained was simply Talon and Lena. Two people who'd learned to love in the crucible of survival. Two souls forged together by fire and flood and the brutal honesty the wilderness demanded. The island had tried to destroy them. Instead, it had made them whole. 2 months after the shipwreck, hope appeared on the horizon. Lena saw it first, a white sail against the blue expanse of ocean. She blinked, certain it was a mirage brought on by sun and exhaustion. But when she looked again, it was still there. Closer now. Talon. Her voice came out as a croak. Talon. He was beside her in seconds, his eyes following her pointing finger. For a moment, neither breathed. Then he was moving, gathering every piece of dry wood they had, building the signal fire they'd maintained for weeks. Smoke billowed into the sky, thick, black, unmistakable. They fed the flames with green leaves, creating a column visible for miles. Lena's hands shook as she worked, afraid to hope, terrified the ship would pass them by. An hour crawled past. Then another. The ship changed course, angling toward their island. A longboat launched, cutting through the surf toward shore. They're coming, Lena whispered. And suddenly she was sobbing. They're actually coming. Talon pulled her against him, his own eyes suspiciously bright. We're going home. But even as he said it, Lena felt something twist in her chest. Home. What did that even mean anymore? The rescue was a blur of activity. Captain Matthias of the merchant vessel Sea Falcon gaped at them as if seeing ghosts. Lord Blackwood? Lady Blackwood? My God, the serpent's crown went down months ago. Everyone presumed you dead. We nearly were, Talon said, his arms still wrapped protectively around Lena. Several times. They were wrapped in blankets, given fresh water that tasted strange after months of stream water. The crew bombarded them with questions. How had they survived? Where were the others? What had happened? Lena answered mechanically, her mind elsewhere. As the island receded behind them, growing smaller with each passing minute, she felt Talon's hand tighten around hers. What happens now? She asked quietly, watching their temporary home disappear. Everything's changed, he replied, his voice thick with emotion. I've changed. We've changed. But they haven't. Lena gestured at the ship, at the crew treating Talon with deferential respect, already falling back into old patterns of hierarchy. The world we're going back to, it's the same one we left. The one that made us both miserable. Then we change it. Talon turned her to face him, his eyes fierce. We don't go back to being those people. We can't. I won't. Your business. Can adapt or burn for all I care. He cupped her face in his calloused hands. I'm not losing you, Lena. Not to society's expectations, not to my company, not to anything. We fought too hard to find each other. She wanted to believe him. Desperately. But fear gnawed at her, fear that the man she loved would disappear back into his corporate armor the moment they touched shore. The return to civilization was chaos. News of their survival spread like wildfire. The wreck of the Serpent's Crown had been major news, a wealthy shipping magnate and his new bride lost at sea, fortunes in flux, competitors circling like sharks. Their reappearance threw the business world into turmoil. Investors demanded meetings. The Corsair family descended, her mother weeping dramatically while her father assessed Talon with calculating eyes. Reporters shouted questions from behind barriers. The noise, the crowds, the suffocating press of society. After months of jungle silence, it was overwhelming. Talon handled it all with grim efficiency, but Lena could see the strain. Saw him slipping back into old patterns, the clipped responses, the cold calculations, the mask sliding back into place. On their third day back, she found him in his study, surrounded by ledgers and reports, dressed in a perfectly tailored suit. He looked like a stranger. Talon. He glanced up, and for a moment, she saw a flash of the man from the island. Then it was gone, replaced by the corporate magnate. Lena. I'm sorry, I have meetings in an hour. Was there something you needed? The formal tone was like a knife to her heart. Do you remember what you promised? That we wouldn't go back to being those people. His jaw tightened. I'm trying to save what's left of the company. Competitors have been circling, thinking I was dead. If I don't. If you don't what? Become the same cold bastard you were before? She crossed her arms. Because that's what's happening. 3 days back, and you've already rebuilt every wall we tore down. That's not fair. Isn't it? She stepped closer, forcing him to meet her eyes. You're wearing the mask again, Talon. And I'm terrified that the man I fell in love with is going to disappear completely. He stared at her, something warring in his expression. Then, slowly, he reached up and loosened his tie, like it was choking him. I don't know how to be both. The man from the island and the man this world needs me to be. Then maybe, Lena said softly, this world needs to change. The press conference was mandatory, a way to reassure investors and stakeholders that Blackwood Shipping would continue operating normally. Talon was supposed to project strength and control, to prove the company hadn't been weakened by his absence. Lena stood in the wings, watching him take the podium, and felt her heart sink. This was it. The moment he'd choose between the man he'd become and the man he'd been. Ladies and gentlemen, Talon began, his voice carrying the authoritative tone she remembered from before. Thank you for gathering. I know there are many questions about the future of Blackwood Shipping, and I intend to address them all. But first. He paused, his eyes finding Lena's in the crowd. Something shifted in his expression. First, I need to say something personal. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. This wasn't protocol. Talon Blackwood didn't do personal. He stepped away from the prepared notes, and Lena's breath caught. For those who don't know, I've spent the last 2 months stranded on an island after my ship went down. It was, he paused, choosing words carefully. It was the worst and best thing that ever happened to me. The crowd was silent now, hanging on every word. I came back to find my company in chaos, my competitors celebrating my presumed death, and everyone expecting me to immediately return to business as usual. To be the man I was before, cold, calculating, putting profit above all else. His voice hardened. But I can't do that. I won't. Lord Blackwood, someone in the crowd started. Let me finish. The command in his voice silenced them. On that island, I learned something my father spent his life trying to beat out of me. That caring about people isn't weakness. That love isn't liability. That sometimes the most important thing you can do is admit you were wrong. He walked off the stage, crossing directly to where Lena stood. The crowd gasped. Cameras flashed. Talon took her hands in his voice dropping but still carrying through the microphone. Lena Corsair, I spent 6 months of our marriage treating you like property. Like an asset on a ledger. I was cruel because I was afraid that if I let myself love you, it would destroy me. My father taught me that lesson well. Tears were already streaming down Lena's face. But you know what actually destroyed me? Talon continued, his own eyes bright. Almost losing you. Watching you face down a jaguar. Holding you during a hurricane and thinking we might die. That destroyed the man I was and rebuilt me into something better. Someone who understands that love isn't weakness, it's the only thing that makes us strong. He turned to address the crowd, but kept Lena's hand in his. So here's what's going to change. Blackwood Shipping will continue, but under new leadership. I'm promoting several key managers who actually care about our people, not just profits. I'll remain as advisor, but I'm stepping back from daily operations. Shocked whispers swept through the room. Because I've learned that life is too short and too precious to spend it building empires instead of relationships. I've learned that the man I became on that island, the man who could love freely and honestly, is worth more than all the money my company will ever make. He turned back to Lena, his voice dropping to just for her. If you'll still have me, not as my wife in a business arrangement, but as my partner in everything. Come with me. Let's build the life we both dreamed of instead of the one we were told to live. Lena couldn't speak around the tightness in her throat. So instead, she answered the only way that mattered. She kissed him. Right there, in front of the cameras and investors and society gossips. She wrapped her arms around his neck and kissed him with everything she had, all the love and fear and hope and joy that had built between them on that distant island. The crowd erupted. Questions were shouted. But Lena heard none of it. There was only Talon, his arms around her, his lips on hers, and the promise of a future they'd chosen together. When they finally broke apart, both were laughing through tears. Is that a yes? Talon asked. That's a yes, Lena confirmed. To all of it. To us. To whatever comes next. Together. Always together. Epilogue, 6 months later. The ship's deck rocked gently beneath Lena's feet, but it didn't frighten her anymore. She'd learned the difference between a ship cutting through calm seas and one being torn apart by a storm. Beside her, Talon stood with his arm around her waist, both of them watching the sun set over the Mediterranean. They'd spent the last 6 months traveling, Greece, Italy, Spain, all the places Lena had dreamed of seeing. Not fleeing their old life, but building a new one. True to his word, Talon had restructured Blackwood Shipping. The company thrived under new leadership focused on sustainability and worker welfare rather than pure profit. Talon consulted occasionally but spent most of his time with Lena, exploring, learning, living. Do you ever miss it? Lena asked. The power, the control, all of it. Sometimes, he admitted honestly. Old habits die hard. But then I look at you, at this. He gestured at the endless horizon. And I remember what actually matters. We could go back, you know. If you wanted. And give up watching you discover the world? Not a chance. He pulled her closer. Besides, I already have everything I need right here. Lena smiled, leaning into him. Careful, Blackwood. You're getting soft. I prefer human. He pressed a kiss to her temple. The island taught me that. You taught me that. She thought about that island sometimes. The terror and beauty of it, the way it had stripped them down to their essentials and rebuilt them into something stronger. Part of her would always carry those months, the sound of waves, the weight of survival, the moment she'd first seen past Talon's walls to the man beneath. Thank you, she said quietly. For what? For the shipwreck. He laughed, the sound warm and free. Only you would thank me for nearly getting us killed. It gave us this. She turned in his arms, rising on her toes to kiss him. It gave us each other. The real versions, not the masks. Then I suppose I should thank the storm too. He deepened the kiss, one hand tangling in her salt-wind hair. When they finally parted, the sun had dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of purple and gold. Tomorrow they'd dock in Barcelona. After that, maybe Morocco. Or perhaps they'd just let the wind decide. For the first time in both their lives, they had the freedom to choose. To wander. To discover not just the world, but each other, every single day. The wilderness had forged them in fire and flood. But love, real, honest, hard-won love, had set them free. Together, they sailed into the gathering darkness, ready for whatever adventures lay ahead. The end. Thank you so much for joining Lena and Talon on their journey from hatred to love, from survival to truly living. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe to hear more tales of transformation and resilience. Share in the comments which moment resonated with you most, Was it the jaguar encounter, the hurricane confession, or that first tentative kiss in the cave? Your thoughts and support mean everything. Until next time, may you find courage in your storms and love in unexpected places.